can see that all the way around. And honestly, it's a beautiful view, I personally think. But yeah, also this is one of my favorite places in Edmonton. Alright, so welcome back to the channel. I thought I'd do something completely different for you guys. Rather than being cooped up at the table, I thought that I would go into the great outdoors, show you a bit around in one of the ravines, and talk about a very interesting topic that was brought up in my Q&A. And that topic is of pickup lines. And basically the question that I got is, what is my opinion on them? And so I thought, rather than just giving a blanket statement like, no, never use them, they're stupid, don't do this, don't do that, I thought I wouldn't be doing the topic justice if I didn't kind of flesh it out. So now before I do that, I should do a wrist check, because that's, kind of what I do. Now, I'll flip this over. So I am wearing my Alpiner 4 with a sunburst blue dial. It is an absolutely amazing watch, especially for like the price category. I'll move along and back to the content for today, which is pickup lines. So rather than me just kind of going through and basically cycling through that, I'm going to give you kind of three important things to think about, in the sense of, first of all, I want to define what a pickup line is. My fingers are getting a little cold. So define what a pickup line is. 2, I want to talk about your application of pickup lines. And then on the third, I'm going to talk about why they're a little bit problematic. Okay, so when we define a pickup line, the really thing that I think about when we're defining a pickup line is that I think of it as a conversation opener. Okay, and you might think, well, you could be like, well, what do I mean by a conversation opener? I mean, it's what starts your conversation. And generally speaking, when we're using a pickup line, first of all, if you're the kind of person who's like, this is just a stupid conversation, or I just want to use pickup lines just to goof around, and say random stuff to random people just for likes, views, whatever, and just for funds and just laughs, whatever, then that's your prerogative. You can do whatever you want. This is more for the conversation for those people who actually kind of want to know more about this and what I mean by it. So when we're talking about that, when we're talking about the pickup lines, when we define it, I think of it more as a canned little ditty in order to spark and spur a conversation. And what do I mean by that is that I mean, an example would be like, my love for you is like diarrhea, I just can't hold it in, or I can't hold it in. Or, if you were a Pokemon, I would choose you, or I choose you. So those are examples of pickup lines that you could use. Okay, so now that we've defined what the pickup line is, that candid little ditty that you use to open a conversation with somebody, usually somebody of the that you would be attracted to. Now we're going to talk about the application. Where would you be using them? Where would you be going off and using these pickup lines? Okay, so in the general sense and speaking, you would be talking and using pickup lines in the sense, sorry, getting over a cold, is you would be using them and I get to walk on the creek, is you would be using them to start the conversation with different people. Now, when for instance, if we're talking the application, usually they'll be like, you could, and I'm going to use a sales reference, okay? So you can have a warm contact versus a cold contact. And this is sales, okay? And I'm not saying that I was a good salesperson when I did this, but so you have warm versus cold. Warm being someone that you kind of already know, or they know you. Now, a good example of that would be like a friend or a friend of a friend that kind of has an idea of who you are. A cold contact, on the other hand, is someone who has no idea who you are. You don't know them. They don't know you. You are simply going up to them and hoping for the best. Okay, so those are your applications per se. And generally speaking, 99% of the time, we're going to be referencing, when we refer to pickup and game in general, is we're talking about cold, like those cold contacts. They're not warm. They're not your friends of your friends, because to be honest, you wouldn't really use a pickup line, quote unquote, if you were just talking to your friends. like your friends are your friends. They might think it's funny, but they might also just be like, well, that's weird. Why don't you just have a normal conversation with me? Which is a criticism of them, right? Because if you already know the person, why on earth are you going to try and do something weird like that? It doesn't make sense. It's not logical. And I'm like a pretty big logical person in the sense. So for me, going back and forth, is that I wouldn't do that. It's not congruent. I like logic, right? And so my big thing is, after we understand the application, that cold context, the cold contact. And so this is where a lot of the criticism comes in as to why they're not effective, and kind of like the should you be using them kind of thing. So this is the third part, right? So we defined them, we talked about where you're probably going to use them, and now we're going to talk about criticism. So one thing that I really want to talk about, just first of all, is kind of a disclaimer. I don't profess to be, first of all, a professional dating coach. I don't profess to be like a pickup artist. I just am going to talk to you about what has per se worked for me. What do I know that's successful, and what do I know that kind of works? And I'm a very logical and analytics person, right? So if I can say something or do something that helps you guys in such a way, then, why wouldn't I do that? If that makes sense. All right, so without any further ado, as I don't slip on the creek bank, that'd be really bad. You'd have a good laugh about that, but I wouldn't. Is that the thing that I find problematic is that you're opening a conversation, right? That's the theoretical approach to using them. This is why you're using them, is you're trying to open a conversation. And especially in that cold approach aspect, they don't know anything about you. They don't know who you are. They don't know your sense of humor. They don't know anything. And what a pickup line is it's the equivalency of going up to someone and being like, I find you attractive, and I can use Google. Because you're not actually conveying who you are as a person. You're just conveying the fact that you can literally Google a pickup line and spurt it out. It is not good. It doesn't make sense. And another biggest thing, and my biggest gripe with it, is that it's not conveying anything about you as a person. It's also not conveying anything about the topic. Like you're basically, sorry, it's not conveying anything. It's finite. Sorry, it's finite, and it's meaning once you've said it, it's done. There's nothing for it to back up on. How can I put it? For instance, if I'm having a conversation with someone, or I'm trying to have a conversation with someone, when I try and open that conversation, I'm going to be doing something by far very different than if I don't want to talk to them. For instance, like a statement, there's a difference between a statement and a question, right? So to open a conversation, you want a question, not just a statement. Because a statement, not everybody has to respond to. A question, they do have to respond to. For instance, if I go up to say to someone, and they're just a random person, and I'm like, or a girl, and I'm like, hey, I think you're attractive. That is a statement, right? They can either respond or they cannot respond. Because at the end of the day, they don't have to. It's not obligated that they respond. And the only response they could really bring is like, well, thank you, that's kind of weird. Or they could be, and it depends on the person, right? I'm not saying this is like a blanket statement, like never use these. It's just really dependent on the person, but it's also like, what is a logical thing to do or say in that instance? And so the biggest thing is that in that finite approach is that you're not actually conveying anything. You're stopping the conversation there. It's like, boom, it's a wall. Because think about it, if there's no, like, you're not obligated to say anything, it's a lot harder for them or the person to come up with something, because now the burden of trying to continue the conversation is now on them rather than you. And so what a lot of people will fall into the trap of doing is they will then try and continue the conversation by throwing in something else that is now also an opener, if that makes sense. So you could be like, say your little opener, non-response, and then all of a sudden, my name is blank, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, well, it didn't really do anything, right? Because your opener now all of a sudden is like, you actually had two openers, if that makes sense. Your first opener was useless. Now your second opener is trying to get a response. So why not start with something that gets you a response? Not something that is canned in the sense of like, I went to Google and I searched something up and that's what I'm going to use. So I like to think of it like food, right? So a pickup line is kind of like craft dinner. Not really that good and not really that useful versus a home-cooked meal, like home-cooked pasta. Like there's a huge difference between craft dinner and like home-cooked pasta. Same thing between a pickup line and something that's actually tailored to the individual and also to the broader situation at hand. So for instance, you could talk a lot about like what kind of openers there are, because there's multiple different sets or different kinds, is that you could also talk about an example that I would like to give, and that's probably been, I think has been kind of successful on my end, is I'm a big proponent of fashion, and especially shoes. I like talking about shoes, especially Jordans. And so if someone were to be wearing like a really cool pair of shoes, I would, rather than me going up to them and saying something completely out of context and being like, you know, my love for you is like diarrhea, I can't hold it in. First of all, it's like a really awkward starter because they don't know you, and like love is also a very contextual word that you probably shouldn't ever be using when you just meet someone. That sounds creepy, first of all. And also, if you're using something like the Pokemon pickup line, you have to assume a lot. Like you're assuming a sense of humor that they may or may not have. You know, that they like Pokemon or they don't. So it can really depend. But you don't want to have to like try and explain the pickup line, because then it doesn't even make sense and it's like awkward. Anyways, so rather than going that, you can use what's like an observation, and you could be like, hey, I think your shoes are super cool. Where'd you get them? So that opens up a conversation, because rather you're making a statement, but you're also backing it up with a question. Because now there's a conversation that is to be had. Because if they ignore you, first of all, that just looks rude on their part. They could be like, well, first of all, who doesn't want to talk about their shoes? Girls in general, or at least the ones that I know, go through a lot of effort to pick out their wardrobes. So if you make a compliment on their wardrobe, chances are, especially their shoes, girls love to shop for shoes, chances are they're going to entertain that, and then we're going to want to talk about their shoes. And so when you're talking about them, go through and be nice. And you could be like, oh, like, especially if they're wearing like Jordans, you could talk about, be like, oh, do you like basketball? And then you could also throw in a little quip saying that you find girls who like basketball to be attractive because, you know, blank, blank, and blank. Right? So that kind of makes sense on that part. But at the end of the day, it comes down to, you have to kind of self-tailor that for you, and you have to do what makes sense for you in that aspect. But I can't tell you what to do. I can only tell you to do certain things. But that's up to you for decide. And I will kind of end things here, now that I'm kind of going back and forth. And there's also a dog. There's also lots of dogs in this ravine. And there's coyotes. But anyways, if you like the content, be sure to give it a thumbs up. My finger's really cold. But give it a thumbs up. And so like the video. Make sure you obviously subscribe. Hit the bell notification to let you know when I do upload videos. If you would like, follow me on Instagram so you do know when I post other really cool stuff on there, and it's a good way to keep in contact with me. And then there's one other thing that I was saying. Oh yes. I had a question for you guys, and it was just in my posting and delivery cycle, is I would like to know, what kind of day would you prefer that I release things? What day works for you guys? And I personally am more like a weekend kind of person, but whatever my viewership is, I'll try and tailor it towards you guys. And then also, what would you prefer, if it was a one video every 2 weeks or once every 1 week? Anyways, I'll let you guys go. See ya. Take care. Bye.